Thank you for joining us today for another lunchtime program, Not the End of the Story, Forgotten Histories from the WPI Digital Archives, with Elizabeth Gorayeb, the Executive Director of the Wildenstein Plattner Institute, on the WPI's online databases and rich archival holdings. I'm Samantha Deutch, the Frick Art Research Library's Digital Art History Lead, and Elizabeth Gorayeb will explore what treasures her archives at the WPI may hold and what new avenues of exploration they offer for the study of 19th and 20th century art history and the history of collecting. So, without further ado, I have the pleasure of turning this over to Elizabeth Gorayeb, and I look forward to seeing you on the other end for a lively discussion. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Again, as Samantha said, I'm Elizabeth Gorayeb from the WPI. I'm the executive director. The WPI is a nonprofit art research center that is based in New York City. We were founded almost 10 years ago in 2016. We were founded by the Hasso-Plattner Foundation in Germany, along with the Wildenstein family, who gifted us all of their historic archives from the Wildenstein Institute in Paris. Now, the topic of my talk, not the end of the story, is really meant to tell you that an archive is a living entity in a certain sense. It's always giving. And just when you think that you know what's in an archive, you can be very surprised by what you find, sometimes very much by serendipity. I'm showing you a picture that I'm going to be speaking about in the beginning of my talk, the Edmonia Lewis portrait by Romare Bearden. But before we go into that, I just want to talk a little bit about the WPI's archive. It was assembled over the last century to support specifically catalog raisonné research for our specific projects. Those projects are ones that the Wildenstein Institute had initiated in the middle of the 20th century, early to mid 20th century, and continued throughout the 20th century. And then upon the formation of WPI in 2016, we as an independent organization started to take on new projects, including the catalog raisonné of Romare Bearden, the catalog raisonné of Tom Wesselman, and most recently, the catalog raisonné of Florine Stettheimer. So all of the archives that we have, by and large, were acquired to support our research and ongoing research of those projects. So that leads me to the second point. We are still using our archives. We're still finding things in our archives. And we are really delighted when researchers outside of our organization also find things in our archive and certainly tell us about their findings. We love to hear when a scholar or a curator has stumbled upon something that has assisted with their research or their forthcoming publication, or even the direction of a curatorial endeavor they're embarking upon. So I'm going to say this throughout the presentation. Please tell us what you're working on and how the archives have helped you, and hopefully this presentation will show you how they can continue to help. The archive, as you'll see, is rich with information. It is vast in scope, and it's eclectic in composition. And what I mean by that is there are things in this archive that sometimes you see and you ask yourself, why do they have that? And it was very much the composition of the archive driven by the needs of the catalog raisonné staff at first working in Paris. The Wildenstein Institute was going around Paris buying up archives, sometimes not knowing what would be inside the archive, but with a hope that it would yield some new information based on either who the possessor was or other elements of the archive that they knew were in it. So a lot of times it was a gamble, and the curatorial process of acquiring archives was somewhat driven by sheer hope that elements would yield something very helpful to each project. So that really is the reason why it's so eclectic. It consists of a lot of different things. As we have seen in our own processing of the archive over the last nearly 10 years, we have found things that have transformed our research priorities. They've sent us off in different directions, and sometimes they have validated hypotheses that we have. So I'm really excited to share some of these unexpected discoveries. The first case study that I'm going to open with is the case of the Romare Bearden Catalog Raisonné project. As some of you may know, we launched this project live online earlier this summer. You're seeing a screenshot of elements of our Romare Bearden digital catalog raisonné project. We focused on Bearden's years between 1964 and 1969, and the works that we were able to study and verify are illustrated in color with the full cataloging, and the works that we only had a vague notion that Bearden did them and we never got to see them in person are simply illustrated in black and white with a request for the owner who is out there somewhere to submit them to us so that we can continue to study Bearden's work. So in a way, it's an iterative catalog raisonné. We publish what we know, we show you what we don't yet know, or what we have a sense of what is out there. And over time, this catalog increases with the information that we release. So again, we launched this in June of earlier this year, and we're going to continue to release different iterations and different tranches of years that we study of Bearden's works. Now, this project is incredibly challenging in that we know that Bearden created something along the lines of 3,000 works. And we know that not because Bearden left a detailed accounting of what he did. In fact, he did not do that. We know that because we worked very closely with the Bearden Foundation in assembling what we are considering the Bearden papers, the Bearden digital archives. And these archives are papers from the artist's estate. They are records that we were granted access to by the Bearden Foundation, also photographs that collaborators of Bearden allowed us to process and digitize for them, as well as most recently audio-visual material that we've been able to process and release online. And going through all of these materials, which truly it is a treasure trove of miscellany and very sometimes, again, in and of itself, eclectic findings, we were able to pinpoint or come up with hypotheses of just how many works Bearden was able to create by looking at all of these exhibition records, correspondence with collectors, sketchbooks, photographs, installation photographs. So that was our own accounting. And this was done by and large by Dr. Kamala Holloway, who is the project manager for the Bearden Catalog Raisonné, and also our very own archivist, Samantha Rowe. Samantha and Kamara, along with Deirdre Harris-Kelly at the Bearden Foundation, really spent an enormous amount of time combing through these archives, processing them, parsing them, and trying to identify works that Bearden did. Now, one of the surprises of going through this archive was a postcard that they found among the miscellany. And it was a postcard of a work that Bearden created of the African-American sculptor Edmonia Lewis. Prior to this discovery in the archive, no one, to our knowledge, knew about this work. We still don't know where it is. All we have is this postcard. So this was quite exciting. It could have been a postcard that was produced for a particular promotional event, but we are not entirely sure where this ended up in the world. But still, it was among an enormous amount of paperwork and miscellany that really just took a going through to discover. And so when we published our Bearden Digital Catalog Raisonné project online, we included this work as one of those that we are hoping someone will come to us and submit for verification so that we can study it. We don't know anything about it. We don't know how big it is. We don't know really how it's assembled, what condition it's in. So really, this kind of shows you the state of our research, but we are indicating that it is out there somewhere. After we released the Bearden Catalog Raisonné, showing you that the work is never done, our eagle-eyed project manager, Kamara, was going through some photo negatives. I don't know if you can see it here, but in the background, we found the Edmonia Lewis. It's right, I don't know if you can see my cursor at this point, but I showed it on the first slide. It's right to the left, or to the left of Bearden's head. Now remember, this is a negative, so the tones are going to be reversed. But now at least we can get a sense of the scale of the work, and it gives us further hope that yes, indeed, it was in Bearden's studio. He did in fact create it with him, and it's out there somewhere. So the work is not finished on this, and we are really looking for the stakeholders of the Beardenverse to help us find this work. But it's just one of the really exciting discoveries we found in our archive in processing the Bearden papers. Another great example of the treasures that an archive can hold is this photograph of Bearden in front of what was once the exhibition of the artist collective Spiral. We know from this photograph that the exhibition was held in the mid-60s at Christopher Street, on 147 Christopher Street. But really, until we started processing the archive and looking through an entire assortment of unlabeled photographs, were we able to learn more about the Spiral exhibition. Something that is important to realize when you're dealing with a catalog raisonné is you are very much dependent on not only the accounting of an artist, but also the accounting of his dealers and collectors, and even the press, who oftentimes documented the exhibition. Because Bearden himself was a social worker, as well as an artist, he was working sometimes outside of the traditional art world ecosystem. He was giving works away. He was giving works away to friends. He was giving works away to people in his community. And he was very much an outsider in the traditional art market arena in that sense, where he didn't have a dealer tracking his every move. There wasn't a press corps showing up necessarily at his openings or the openings in which he participated as a member of a group. So a lot of information historically has not been saved and was not preserved about the Spiral exhibition. Now, when Samantha started researching the archive and going through the boxes and boxes of photographs that really didn't have any other unifying umbrella other than the fact that they were coming from the Bearden estate, she started to piece together elements that helped us understand what Spiral was. Samantha, I know, who is very intrepid, went down to Christopher Street to this exact address, and she realized that this random photograph in the box is actually the storefront of 147 Christopher Street. Here, just matching up the architecture, the interior of the space, and then across the street, you can see the same archway there today. Is Bearden standing, we believe, right in front of 147 Christopher Street with some presumably attendees at the exhibition. We don't know who these folks are, but hopefully as more people visit our archive and more archives become available and people start learning about Spiral, we'll be able to identify these folks. Something else that we were able to identify among the photographs using the Spiral exhibition catalog, and I'll just show you that here. We'll go back. Bottom left corner is the frontispiece for the Spiral exhibition catalog. Samantha, working with that catalog, was able to go through photographs and spot the Norman Lewis composition that's illustrated in the catalog. She found it in a photograph here in the center that you'll see, with Bearden standing right in front of it with this unidentified gentleman. Again, we have no accounting for who showed up at the spiral opening. We don't know who the patrons were necessarily, but it's in going through and processing an archive like this that we start to crack the code of elements of history that were either forgotten or not necessarily the subject of a lot of scrutiny due to a host of factors, due to the fact that there weren't necessarily the market infrastructures surrounding Bearden that could document all of these events in his lifetime. And there wasn't necessarily an entity that was preserving all of this information while it was being produced for a catalogue raisonné to be released someday. Bearden, again, was an African-American artist and was not benefiting from some of the privileges of his white male counterparts during the 60s, who did have this armature surrounding them and looking towards legacy preservation efforts like a catalogue raisonné. So we are doing that now with Bearden. Going through an archive, processing it, putting it online is enabling us to reconstruct a story that has not been told. Now, as I said, essential materials for catalogue raisonné research are very much the artist's studio archives. But there are other elements as well that make this work possible. There are historic dealer records, correspondence, and that could be correspondence between an artist and a dealer, or an artist and his or her cohorts, or a dealer and a collector. But correspondence is really essential for piecing together histories of pictures and even identifying the histories of works of art. Art historians' work files are also very important. Over time, we must realize that art historians come and go, and there are historians who make great efforts in researching an artist's production, and then that historian is no longer with us, but the files live on. And looking through those files is very important in terms of understanding what historians at the time were thinking and recognizing as being important within the artist serve. So that is an essential component when studying an artist's production. Is who else is studying the artist's production? Collectors' inventories. This is a bit more straightforward, but it's always nice to have an inventory of a famous collector to see what that collector may have had in their possession. And sometimes surprises abound when you start looking to see what a collector acquired or sold throughout their life. That is something that we do have at WPI in spades because of that effort of the Wildenstein Institute going out and just buying up files from people, or even being a repository when people wanted to donate their files. Wildenstein Institute did have that and passed it along to us. We also have an incredible repository of historic sales catalogs. Right now, we have over 24,000 sales catalogs that we have digitized that can be found on our website. And sales catalogs, for those of you who do provenance research, you know the value of a sale catalog and the information that it can yield, not only evidence that a work was sold, but also how the work was cataloged, how it looked, if there was a photograph in it, and also who the consignor was, and sometimes, if it's annotated, who the buyer was. Buyers and sellers, and also models, artist models, are very important to our research. And this is why we do focus on biographical and geneographical information in our archive. I'll show you some examples of that in the coming minutes. But also photo studio archives, namely the photographers who were paid by the artist or the dealer to photograph the work, either for publicity, for sales catalogs, for monographs. But those photo studios maintained records, and they maintained images of everything they ever took. And those images are incredibly helpful when seeing an artist at a particular, or seeing a work of art at a particular time. And then lastly, just it's important to note that any sort of research for a catalog raisonné will only be as successful as the curiosity and perseverance of the researcher. And so it kind of comes full circle. It's with that curiosity and perseverance that you start diving into these elements of the archive. Now, I'm just going to take you through some of the amazing archives and, again, eclectic and sometimes quirky archives that you'll be able to find at WPI on our website. These archives, by and large, were processed by Sophie Petrie and Laura Espignon, who are two of our staff members in Paris at the Fonds WPI. And they have spent the last 10 years after the digitized materials became available to process online. They have gone through these historic archives and they have parsed them and done a lot of identifying of these materials themselves. So one of the most popular archival resources that we have online is the Ambroise Vollard Gallery Records. Vollard was a very important art dealer at the beginning of the 20th century, most notably for his involvement with Cézanne, Matisse, Pablo Picasso. The Vollard stockbooks are incredibly useful in showing the transactions of Vollard, the transactions of Vollard, the artists that he dealt with, and also the prices that he sold his art for. Sometimes you'll see notes in these stockbooks about where an work of art went, the condition that it was in, where it came from, various attempts at selling the work, whether or not he had it in his own personal stock or if he was partnering with another dealer. What's very important to keep in mind is that we digitized the Vollard stockbooks A and C, and the Musée d'Orsay possesses stockbook B, which has not been digitized yet. You have to consult it by appointment only. So hopefully someday they will digitize it. But for now, look at our archive. Forgive me. A very interesting case that yielded some really informative information from the Vollard archive itself, not only the stockbook, but Vollard papers, was this invoice that you're seeing on the right. This is a sales receipt for artist materials that were purchased in 1899. And it corresponds with something that Vollard wrote to Gauguin himself. Gauguin, again, in Tahiti, Vollard is writing to him saying, I'm going to buy you materials. That's all that I'm going to support you. I'm going to buy you good quality canvases and good quality pigments, and then I'll buy your paintings from you. And so here we have evidence of those materials that Vollard purchased for Gauguin. And on the lower left, you're seeing one of the paintings that Vollard did indeed purchase from Gauguin as promised, created with these materials. So why is this important? It's important to show that indeed these were the materials. Now, I'm not going to go into the world of speculation on Gauguin and what he painted or what he didn't paint, but this is a very good indication of the importance of material records in the artist's production and what types of pigments he was using. So one could test theoretically if these pigments indeed are in the composition that you're seeing on the left. So it does yield some very important scientific material for those who are interested in the forensic analysis of the artist's work. Another archive that we are very involved in for a catalog raisonné project is the Marquet archive. Albert Marquet is an ongoing catalog raisonné project that we do host committees for Marquet. The printed volume of the Marquet catalog raisonné was issued by the Wildenstein Institute in 2001. We're continuing to look at Marquet's works that are presented to us at committees. Marquet was also very involved with the Galerie Drouet. We have those Galerie Drouet records, and these records and Marquet's own archive are available for consultation on our website. Something that is very interesting to note on the Marquet archive are the correspondence that Marquet had not only with some of his cohorts about his works of art, but one such element of correspondence yielded a little bit of legal history. You're looking at a postcard that was written by the wife of the painter Charles Camoin to Marquet. And the details of what this is saying, it's very interesting for those of you who are interested in intellectual property. Apparently, Camoin had discarded some canvases that he wasn't happy about. He effectively threw them in the trash. Someone fished them out of the trash, spruced them up, and tried to sell them at the flea market in Paris. Now, Camoin intercepted this sale. He got wind of it, intercepted, and took the seller to court. And Camoin prevailed. And this postcard is from Camoin's wife to Marquet saying, "Hooray, we were successful at court." He might appeal. But this is one of the first examples of intellectual property and the artist's right, and the courts siding with an artist for their own intellectual property. So tidbits like these were very surprising to find among Marquet's paper and kind of give some light into the legal circumstances of the day. We also know that there was correspondence back and forth between Marquet and Matisse. And you can find some of that on our website itself, along with little illustrations that Marquet did in these correspondence. Now, I'd mentioned our historians' work files. I just wanted to touch upon one such work file that has fairly recently inspired another project. What you're looking at here is Rudolf Voltaire's topographical photographs that he did for the original Monet Catalogue Raisonné project. The Wildenstein Institute and Daniel Wildenstein famously assembled probably one of the most well-regarded catalogue raisonnés in history, which is the catalogue raisonné for Monet. And in order to do that, Wildenstein had a team of researchers not only track down the paintings, but also assemble working materials to identify painting locations. Rudolf Voltaire was chief among the researchers involved with this project, and he went around France and the UK taking photographs and assembling historic photographs from postcards of the sites that Monet painted. You can see all of these photographs on our website, and they're very interesting in order to get a real-time or maybe not a real time, but a photographic perspective of what Monet was depicting, where he might have stood, what the light conditions might have been. Now, this project, very interestingly, inspired another one. Earlier in the year, we had a webinar with a photographer named Christophe Irgang, who was inspired by Rudolf Voltaire's original work and was also commissioned by the Museum Barberini to do something similar, to travel around France and again, take photographs of the sites that Monet painted. And you can see in some cases the wearing of the cliffs, the different changes in the topography of the landscape, which is very interesting to see how a landscape evolves over time and what might have been there years ago that is no longer there today. But this was an excellent, excellent example of how our archive really inspired and connected with another project. And we were so excited to have Christophe present his work, and all of our webinars certainly can be watched and found online, and I invite you to tune into that. You can see it on YouTube. Another great example, and this was a little bit surprising, of the information that we had. I've mentioned collector's papers. We had a trove of materials from the collector Michel and Irma van Gelder. I'd never really heard of these folks before, but our archival team started processing these papers. And Van Gelder, as it turns out, for those of you who are scholars of old master paintings, of Renaissance and Dutch paintings, Van Gelder was a very important collector of those works. And we see in his correspondence a lot of his acquisitions at the time of pictures that are now in major museums around the world. What was so striking, though, for us was not so much Michel van Gelder, but his wife, Irma van Gelder. Who was Irma van Gelder? Well, Irma outlived her husband, and we found through the correspondence that throughout the Nazi occupation, Irma was opportunistic, to say the least. She was trying to sell her pictures, oftentimes, to the voracious members of the Nazi Party who were looking to not only fill Hitler's museum in Linz with some of the great works of Western art, but also to buy them for their own collections. So we have evidence of Irma writing back and forth to folks, to dealers throughout Europe, offering her pictures, and whether those pictures ended up in Nazi collections, it's not necessarily clear, but we do know one example. It's the example of the Rembrandt in the Leiden collection. Prior to, or in the midst of our researching Irma van Gelder, we came across reference to this Rembrandt, and you can see the correspondence here. She's referencing a Rembrandt, and she's talking to this fellow David Katz, and in the 1950s, she was trying to still sell this Rembrandt. We also know that in the Leiden documentation that they published online, and this was several years ago, they had referenced this D. Katz as part of their provenance in 1938, and Schaefer Galleries 1939. We knew, though, that it was with Irma in 1954, and we knew because of our research on our papers that D. Katz was this David Katz, who was kind of her runner during the war. So in contacting the folks at the Leiden collection, we let them know that, in fact, this was with Irma throughout the war. She was probably trying to sell it. And they have changed their cataloging, as it reads now, to this was with Michel van Gelder, and it remained with Irma. And very nicely, they refer to our archive. But again, for those of you who are working with institutional collections, we continue to find these things that relate to collections. It's just that we reached out to the Leiden collection. We alerted them of this, but feel free to take a look on our website to see if any of your works might be referenced in these papers as well. I'd mentioned before the sales catalogs, and I'm going to see if my technical skills are up to snuff here. I'm showing you all of the 24,000 sales catalogs and a screenshot also by this video showing you from where they came. So these are not only French catalogs, these are catalogs from all over Europe, and they are remarkable in their breadth and scope. They date from the 17th century up until 1945. We continue to digitize, and will periodically be releasing more catalogs, but right now we're still processing the metadata for all of these catalogs so that they appear on WorldCat. It's a very back-end project that we're doing, but we want these catalogs to be discoverable by all means, and they are available currently on our website. Sometimes in my own free time, I will look at these catalogs just out of curiosity to see what I can find. And in putting together a completely different presentation on the history of catalog raisonnés, I wanted to see what we had in our sales catalogs, to see if our sales catalogs ever evidenced reference to a catalog raisonné. And I was very interested in finding what is in fact the first catalog raisonné. It was a sales catalog. This is an example of a sales catalog in our database from 1736. It's by a dealer named Gersant, who had a gallery on the Pont Notre Dame. And he was selling, at the time this was published, an assemblage of natural curiosities, shells and corals and similar objects. He published what he termed as a catalog raisonné for this sale. And it was lending the sale brochure an element of scholarship by referring to it as a reasoned catalog. And it really emphasized the point that oftentimes there is a crossover in terms of the motivations behind the production of a sales catalog, behind a catalog raisonné. Sometimes they are very much marketing tools to signify the importance of a work of art. And for Gersant and for others who came after him, the idea of calling something a catalog raisonné was a great way to market a work and to elevate its cachet and indicate that it had a certain amount of importance. So I'm just showing you this to show that these sales catalogs, they do comprise what you are used to oftentimes with a catalog, which is a roster of list of things that are bought and sold at an auction. But on occasion, you can find things like this, which kind of give you another insight into the history of the art market and the history of collecting. Now, pivoting over to biographical genealogical records. Again, this is something that I'm really pleased is on our website and that scholars are using. These are the papers of Dr. Gachet. Dr. Gachet, for those of you who are familiar with Van Gogh's work, was a supporter of Van Gogh and a subject of his portraits. Wildenstein, at some point during their history, acquired the Gachet papers. They are online and digitized. And I was very pleased to learn that Dr. Wouter van der Veen, who is an independent scholar working on Van Gogh, was able to identify this woman who features in a photo book that Gachet had. Wouter identified her as Lisette, Gachet's illegitimate daughter. And it starts to raise questions on whether this was one of Van Gogh's models, in fact. But it was through Wouter's research of the Gachet archives that he was able to make this connection. And it sort of lends itself to further inquiry into who the models were and who the people surrounding Van Gogh were during the last years of his life. So that was very exciting. And again, Wouter's webinar, you can watch it. You can find it on our webinar and on our website, and you can watch it on YouTube. Now, this was a very interesting find. We were given the archive of the collector Florence Gould. Florence Gould was someone who was known to have had an incredible collection of all sorts of things, not only fine art, but decorative arts. And there's some, there was a very well-known sale of the Gould collection. I believe it was in the 1980s. We, at the Wildenstein Institute, we maintain this file of miscellany, not only of that sale catalog from the 80s, but also these photographs of Florence Gould. And among those photographs were a cache that referred to a trip she took on the SS Normandy in the 1930s. And this got my curiosity. And this is just a bit of personal information myself. I grew up in New York City, and my family went to Our Lady of Lebanon Church, a Maronite church in Brooklyn Heights. The doors on that church, if any of you are familiar, are from the SS Normandy. So I knew about the SS Normandy. It was a luxury liner during the 1930s that ferried people on luxurious transatlantic trips. The Rockefellers traveled on the Normandy, as did so many of the celebrities of the day. So here you're seeing an image, and it's a press image of Florence Gould with her, I don't know if they're Pekingese, I think, perhaps, or Shih Tzus, not sure, and her sister on the SS Normandy. Clearly, the press showed up at port and took photographs of her upon arrival, or possibly upon the commencement of her voyage. But these were events, they were very glamorous events. There were also photos within this same cache of materials of other passengers on that trip. And as I was looking at this, I noticed that there is I'm talking about the photo on the right, sitting at that table in the back is a woman with a hat on. That is the French writer Colette. And then to the far left is a man in profile. That is the artist Andre Derain. So again, not expecting to find this at all, but now we know Colette and Derain were on a ship to New York with Florence Gould. And it does kind of lead to these questions that could evidence a lot more inquiry about Derain, about what works of art were coming over on the Normandy, what artists and what collectors were taking the Normandy for trips to France, for buying trips. And we know this is exactly what Gould was doing when she was going to Europe. She was buying works of art to bring back with her to New York. So again, unexpected, food for thought. Now, I had mentioned again the eclecticism of the archive. One of the most eclectic and unexpected, and sometimes head-scratching caches that we have is this photo archive from Bernays Maritou, which was a photography company working in France. And again, they were commissioned to not only photograph works of art, but they were photographing people, places, and things. Now, for us at WPI, what was interesting and wondering, why did we acquire this? We noticed that among the cache of photographs were photographs of the studio of the French sculptor Francois Pompon. And you can see on the bottom left here, Pompon's studio with some of his well-known animalia. And there are other Pompon examples in this photo collection. But even looking at the more random elements of the archive, the women, the men, the children, the weddings, the groups of people, the interior views, the landscapes, the cityscapes, industrial sites, going through these, you start to see Paris and the French surroundings at a particular moment in history. And for those of you who are cultural historians, it really does capture life in France, snapshots of France at a particular time in history. These are great sources of that sort of information. We think that the Wildenstein Institute was acquiring these photographic archives for their publications to source imagery, for the various, not only catalog raisonnés, but monographs that they were using. Even sometimes looking through these eclectic photos of men, women, and children, it's interesting, like I did with the Derain and Colette, to come across people who may look familiar and who may later on go on to be people of note. So if you are so inclined, please have a look and tell us what you find. Something that was more obvious that we did inherit in terms of its value for the catalog raisonné projects was the Visivona plates. Visivona was a very well-known photography company that specialized in photographing fine art. And we have all of their photo archives having to do with a variety of 19th century French artists, including the ones you see here: Manet, Seurat, Courbet, Morisot, Van Gogh, Degas. And as a provenance researcher, sometimes these can be very valuable in that they're showing the work at a particular moment of time. It's also showing the work in a particular condition in some regard. When the photo was taken, you can compare it with the original state to see if there have been any additions or subtractions from the work from the time when it was photographed. But these have been incredible resources for our catalog raisonné researchers in comparing works of art, or even finding a work of art that may have been overlooked throughout history. Now, lastly, again, I'm going to wow you with my AV skills. We have a tremendous amount of archives in France, out in the provinces in deep storage that we have not digitized. We have not processed these, and I'm showing you an animated list of what these are. You can find them on our website at wpi.art. But we realized when we received the Wildenstein gift that we were not going to be able to process everything, digitize everything. We would just, it would just take forever. We also didn't know how much utility would some of these archives yield. But what we did learn is that there is interest in some of those archives, and we would be very open to hearing from our audience to see what they would like digitized. We're crowdsourcing what should we digitize next tally. If there is something that you spot on the archive, the unprocessed archives that you want to have now, you can request for that to be digitized. It's at the cost of digitization, and we can have that digitized for you. But there is a tremendous amount that remains to be parsed and processed. It is there. We want to know what is most helpful for our audience, what is most helpful for your project, and how we can continue adding resources on our website to enhance what we already have. So with that, again, I've been saying it throughout. Please tell us how these archives have helped you. We'd love to hear about your work. And I wish you all happy hunting. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Samantha.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I know where I'm spending some of my time in my free time in the coming days. I will be digging in. I also think it would be great to link some of your resources with some of our materials at the library.
Wonderful, absolutely.
Yeah. I know some dealers, I'm like, I don't think I have that in the archives directory. So I will be digging in there. It's
Fantastic.
fascinating. It's fascinating to me too, that like object records, people take it for granted. They think that they're complete. They see them
Yeah,
in a museum, but this is always a good, not quite, you can always find something. Maybe,
absolutely.
yeah, may have been in a sale that didn't sell, it was bought in. And I really like your example with the Rembrandt as well. Um, we do have questions, so I'm going to jump into those.
Okay, great.
First question is by Jung Ah Hu. It says, thank you very much for the amazing presentation, archival research, especially locating specific information amid countless documents and photographs, demands extraordinary amount of time and effort. And they're talking about how AI could serve as a valuable tool to assist in this process. Have there been any particular attempts or initiatives at your institution to explore this possibility?
Absolutely. We partnered a few years ago with the Plattner Institute graduate program in trying to do image recognition through AI. And what we learned is that AI yields what is available online. If you ask an AI processor to retrieve information for you, it is only going to retrieve what is available for it to read in the online universe. So with that in mind, we worked with these graduate students in having them try to do image recognition for some of these miscellaneous caches of photographs that we had, thousands and thousands of them. Rather than having a human being going in and caption every photograph, we said, okay, can AI do this? So the grad students created a picture identifier of sorts, and they trained it on available training data. Well, that training data was very much geared towards Renaissance art. So one of the more hilarious examples we found was it was a painting from the early 20th century of a doctor in an operating studio, and AI identified this as Jesus and the apostles at the Last Supper, Netherlandish 17th century. I mean, it was ridiculous, but it hallucinated. It knew it had to label it with something, and that was the information that was out there. So yes, we have used AI in that regard. Of course, AI, in a way, we are feeding AI as art historians by putting this information out there online. I do think, and I like to tell everyone, we as art historians have a responsibility when it comes to AI in making sure that vetted information is being sourced by these AI bots. So the examples of digitization and processing and vetting and making it available, it is certainly something that is culturally imperative, and it behooves us as art historians to make sure that culture is represented accurately. So we're almost feeding into AI by doing this work. I know that can be a controversial take, but yes, AI, it exists, it's out there, it's happening, it's getting better every day. We just want to make sure that the information that we care about is represented accurately and can be sourced.
The rest seem more like comments than questions, but maybe they might bring up a question. I have Austin Chin who said, thank you. Every semi-arcane aspect of art history is fascinating. Regarding catalog raisonnaires, I had no idea how varied the work was and how many sources included, postcards that you would consult, etc. Another person said, in the case of contemporary art, especially works that involve video, installation, or technological components, there are often issues of reconstruction, reinstallation, and multiple versions of a single work. They imagine that this is a significant effect on how a catalog raisonné is structured. And they were wondering whether your institution is also engaged in compiling catalogs raisonné for such non-traditional forms of work.
Well, that's a great question. Right now at WPI, we're focused on 19th and first half of the 20th century into mid-century. We work with a partner company in Germany. They are a nonprofit called Navigating Art, and they are effectively creating the technology that we use to host and display our catalog raisonnés. And I know that Navigating Art is working with some entities that are dealing with other media. So that is a very good question. We personally are not doing that, but the company, the nonprofit company, our brother or sister company, tech company is indeed.
Cool, thank you. And then it just is another comment from an anonymous person. They just said they were wondering if Florence Gould was a collaborator during.
Oh, that's a very interesting point. I know that I don't know much about her, but I do know that, yeah, she's had some dirty dealings, I understand.
Yeah, there's something in the back of my mind about that too.
not great, not great. She is not necessarily a role model, but I believe that is correct. I think she was a collaborator in that regard. So yes.
Well, I think we're winding down on questions. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that I have a lot of resources to pick through in the next coming days. I'm especially interested in the shipping images to see who else is on those.
Yeah, please let us know. I'd love to know too. Absolutely.
If I find anybody I recognize, I'll let you know.
Great. Thank you.
Anyways, thank you all for coming today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks so much.
Take care.